So the big question we want to answer is, can we find a general formula by solving a generic quadratic equation? So we have a method called completing the square that will solve any quadratic equation. So here we have a generic quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c. This is in standard form when it's equal to 0. It's called standard form. So we've got this standard form equation, and let's see if we can solve it just using a, b, and c, which a, b, and c are real numbers, so we'll keep that in mind. They could be any real number. Okay, so completing the square. How do we complete the square? Well, the first thing we got to do is we got to get this c out of there, and then we're going to have to divide the a off because we need to be x squared. We need to have x squared plus something, question mark, x equals something. That's where we need to go. So let's keep that in mind, and let's start by subtracting c from both sides, and we get ax squared plus bx equals negative c. So we subtracted c, subtract c, 0 minus c is negative c. Okay, well, now let's get this a out of there because we need to have just a plain old 1x squared. You can't complete the square until you get 1x squared. So we're going to divide everything by a. And when we do that, we're going to end up with x squared because the a's just cancel here. And then we'll have b divided by a. So we've got a fraction, but that's okay. We can handle that. Equals negative c divided by a. Now I'm going to complete this square, so I'm leaving a little gap here on purpose because I want to think about what goes in this gap. I'd like to add something to make this a perfect square trinomial so we can factor this and complete the square. So what are we going to add? We're going to take half of this value here, b over a, and square it, because that's how we complete the square. Hopefully you've been working on completing the square. And to figure out what we need to add, it's half of this coefficient that's in front of the x squared. And so we got b over a, so this equals b over 2a squared. And that's going to be b squared over 4. We're going to square the top, square the bottom, 4a squared. All right, so that's what we want to add there. We're going to add that to complete the square. B squared over 4a squared. So we got to add that to both sides. Now let's not get ourselves too confused. That's just a little side thought there. So we're going to add b squared over 4a squared. Now, you might be getting a little scared here, but don't worry. It's going to all come out nice in the end. Now, the nice thing about what we just did here is we know that this will factor. This side, as ugly as it is, because we completed the square, we know it's going to be x plus something squared. What is that something? Well, that's always half of this coefficient. And half of b over a is this b over 2a. All right? So it's b over 2a. Now this side, we need to add these things. So we're going to need a common denominator. We got 4a squared here. We just have a here. So we're going to need to get a common denominator. We can multiply by 4a on top and bottom. All right? And that gives us 4a squared. And then negative 4ac, can't do anything with those. And b squared over 4a squared. Now I have a common denominator, so we can simplify those. That leaves us with x plus b over 2a squared. And then we got a denominator of 4a squared. We're going to go ahead and add these fractions. And we've got negative 4ac plus b squared, or let's put the b squared in front. That's the same as b squared minus 4ac. Just adding those two numerators there. All right, we're getting there. Remember, where are we going? We're trying to solve for x. The x is over here. It's locked in this x squared. Do not try to square both of these. It doesn't work that way. You can't just square this term and square that term. We've got to get rid of this. So we're completing the square, which actually is the square root method at this point. So we're going to square root both sides to get rid of that square. What you do to one side, you got to do to the other. Okay. Now, let's get a little more room here. So that's nice because that gets rid of the squared over here. We got x plus b over 2a. Now we're going to square root the top and square root the bottom. Well, the bottom works nice when you square root the bottom. Square root of 4a squared is 2a. All right. When we square root the top, well, we get the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Don't try to do anything with that. You can't. And we got to remember it's plus minus, because whenever we use the square root method and we square root both sides, we're going to have a plus minus. So don't try to square root this 4 or anything like that. There's a minus in there. You can't really do anything with it. So we're getting real close. We're almost there. So we're trying to solve for x. So we're going to need to subtract b over 2a from both sides. Remember, that's just a, b, and c are just the numbers from that original equation. And we got all of this plus all of this. And so we're just adding these things. So we're going to go ahead and put this in front there. So we have x equals negative b over 2a. And we got this plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, they have a common denominator. That's nice. They both have 2a. So we're going to get our last step and combine those things. And we have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And that is a huge, important formula. Now remember, the a, b, and c, where do those come from? Well, this came from the equation ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So if you have an equation that looks like this, then this is the formula that gives you the answer. And this is a hugely important formula. We call it the quadratic formula. It's like a magic recipe for cooking up answers for any quadratic equation. So you're going to want to memorize this and know that whenever you have an equation like this, it's equal to 0 and it's quadratic. You take the a, b, and c, you plug those numbers in here, do the arithmetic, and do your order of operations, and you'll get the answer. Pretty amazing. So that's a quadratic formula. That's where it comes from. You probably won't have to recreate that, but it is useful to know it's not magic. It's not just invented. It is the result of completing the square on a standard equation with a, b's, and c's. So what you need to memorize the quadratic formula and use it whenever you have this standard form equation, and you'll get the answer.